The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow across the stretch of highway. Cars zipped by in a steady stream, their engines humming a rhythm of indifference to the world around them. Amid the rush, an elderly couple was driving back home after a quiet day out. The man gripped the steering wheel with steady hands, his wife seated beside him, gazing out at the countryside that blurred past their windows. They cherished these drives that gave them time to talk, to reflect, and to enjoy the peacefulness of each other's company. Just as they rounded a bend, something on the shoulder of the road caught the woman's attention. At first, she thought it was just debris, a piece of trash left behind by a careless traveler. But as the car drew closer, she gasped and placed a hand on her husband's arm. "Slow down," she said urgently. "There's something there, someone." The man eased off the accelerator, and their car rolled to a stop a few feet ahead. The figure was not a person, as she had first thought. It was a dog, a scruffy, thin creature with matted fur and a slight limp. The animal's head hung low, its tail tucked tightly between its legs. It was clear from the way it moved, hesitant and shaky, that it was in pain and utterly lost. The woman's heart clenched. "We can't just leave it there," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her husband nodded, his face lined with concern. Without a second thought, he put the car in park and stepped out. The moment he approached, the dog flinched and tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The highway stretched endlessly, and the fields beyond offered no shelter. The man crouched down, his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey there, buddy," he murmured. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." The woman joined him, carrying a bottle of water and a small blanket they kept in the car. Her voice was soft and soothing as she knelt beside her husband. "You poor thing," she said. "What happened to you out here all alone?" The dog's eyes, dark and glassy, flicked between the two strangers. It was as though it couldn't decide whether to trust them or flee. But the exhaustion was too much. With a small, pitiful whimper, the dog sank to the ground, its body giving up before its spirit could make a choice. Carefully, they wrapped the dog in the blanket and carried it to their car. The man laid it gently on the back seat, while the woman made sure it had water to drink. As they pulled back onto the road, the couple exchanged a look of silent agreement that this fragile creature was now their responsibility. It was only when they reached the nearest veterinary clinic that the gravity of the situation became clear. The vet, a kind but serious woman, ushered the couple into an exam room while her team began examining the dog. They explained how they had found it, and the vet nodded, her expression unreadable as she listened. After what felt like an eternity, the vet returned. Her face was grave, her hands clasped together. "It's a miracle you found this dog when you did," she began, her voice heavy with meaning. "But there's something you need to know." The couple leaned forward, their hearts pounding. The vet hesitated for a moment, as though choosing her words carefully. Finally, she said, "This dog. It's not just any stray. There's a story behind it, and you won't believe what we've uncovered." The woman's breath caught in her throat. The man's brows furrowed in confusion. The vet's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to break. What could she mean? What kind of story could a broken, battered dog carry? As the vet began to explain, the couple realized their decision to stop that day would lead them down a path they could never have imagined. But for now, they could only listen, their hearts racing with both fear and curiosity, as the truth began to unfold. The room fell silent as the vet's words lingered in the air. The couple exchanged nervous glances, their curiosity warring with a growing sense of unease. The vet hesitated for a moment before continuing, her tone calm but laced with urgency. "When we scanned the dog for a microchip," she explained, "we found something unexpected. This dog belongs to someone, or rather, it did. And the circumstances surrounding it are unusual." The woman's hands gripped her husband's arm tightly. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The vet sighed, glancing briefly at the door behind her, as if to ensure no one else could overhear. The chip is registered to an address nearly 200 miles from here, she said. The owner listed is a man who reported this dog missing over a year ago. But here's the strange part: that man passed away 6 months ago under suspicious circumstances. The words hit the couple like a gust of icy wind. The woman's eyes widened, and her husband's jaw tightened. Suspicious circumstances? He asked, his voice low and steady. The vet nodded gravely. It's all public record. The man's death was ruled an accident, but there were rumors, talk of foul play, strange activity around his property. And now this dog shows up, miles away, injured and alone. It doesn't make sense. The woman's heart ached as she looked toward the door leading to the examination room, where the dog was being tended to. It seemed impossible that this frail, broken creature could be tied to something so sinister. And yet here they were. Is the dog in any immediate danger? The man asked, his protective instincts kicking in. The vet shook her head. Physically, no. Aside from malnutrition, a sprained leg, and some cuts and bruises, it's in better shape than I expected. But... She hesitated, her voice dropping. I think someone might have been trying to keep this dog out of sight. The injuries suggest it's been on the run for some time, possibly avoiding whoever or whatever caused its original disappearance. The room grew colder as the weight of the vet's words sank in. The woman couldn't help but wonder, why would anyone go to such lengths to harm or hide a dog? What secrets could it possibly hold? We need to do something, the woman said firmly, turning to her husband. We can't just leave it here and walk away. The man nodded. Of course. But we need to be careful. If there's more to this than we understand, we don't want to put ourselves or the dog in danger. The vet seemed to sense their determination. I can hold on to the dog for a day or two while you decide what to do next, she offered. But after that, it'll need a safe place to stay. No, the woman said immediately. We'll take it. We can look after it until we figure this out. Her husband hesitated, but the look in her eyes silenced any protest he might have voiced. All right, he said finally. But we'll need to be cautious. If someone's looking for this dog, they might not have good intentions. The vet nodded. I'll prepare some paperwork and provide you with everything you'll need: food, medicine, and a way to contact me if anything happens. As the couple drove home later that evening, the dog curled up in the back seat, wrapped snugly in the same blanket they had used to rescue it. The highway stretched before them, its lights flickering like distant stars. The woman turned to her husband, her face thoughtful. What if this dog knows something? She asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Her husband raised an eyebrow. Knows something? It's a dog, not a detective. I know, she replied, her voice tinged with frustration. But animals remember things. They sense things. What if this dog witnessed something? What if it's running from something or someone? He didn't respond immediately, but her words lingered. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting the dog's for a brief moment. There was something in its gaze, something that felt almost human. When they reached their house, they carried the dog inside and laid it gently on a soft bed of blankets in the corner of their living room. The woman sat beside it, stroking its head softly as it drifted into an uneasy sleep. Her husband busied himself locking the doors and checking the windows, an unspoken sense of paranoia settling over him. That night, either of them slept well. The dog stirred and whimpered in its sleep, its legs twitching as though it were running from something in its dreams. The woman stayed by its side, whispering soothing words, while her husband sat by the window, watching the shadows outside. The next morning, as the couple prepared breakfast, the woman couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced out the kitchen window and thought she saw a figure in the distance, standing near the edge of their property. But when she blinked, it was gone. She turned to her husband, her voice trembling. Do you think someone followed us? He frowned, setting down his coffee mug. I don't know. But let's not take any chances. We'll keep the doors locked, and we'll be careful about who we talk to. Later that day, they decided to take the dog for a short walk in their backyard. Its injuries made it difficult for it to move far, but it seemed eager to stretch its legs. As they walked, the dog's demeanor shifted. Its ears perked up, and its nose twitched, as though it were picking up a scent it recognized. Suddenly it froze, its body tense. The woman crouched beside it, following its gaze. At first, she saw nothing but trees and shrubs. But then, in the distance, she noticed something strange, a small, metallic glint partially buried in the dirt. "What is that?" she murmured. Her husband approached cautiously, his boots crunching against the fallen leaves. As he dug into the dirt, he unearthed a small, battered object, a dog tag, engraved with a name and an address. The name didn't match the one registered to the microchip. The woman's heart raced. Why would the dog have a different tag? She wondered aloud. Her husband examined the tag closely, his brow furrowed. This address isn't anywhere near where the vet said the owner lived. Something's not adding up. The dog began to whine softly, tugging against the leash as though it wanted to lead them somewhere. The couple exchanged a glance, uncertainty etched on their faces. "Do we follow it?" the woman asked. Her husband hesitated. "I don't know. But whatever this is, it's bigger than we thought." As the dog pulled gently against the leash, its eyes filled with a mix of urgency and desperation, the couple realized they had a choice to make: continue down the path of uncertainty, or turn back and leave the mystery unsolved. But something in the air, something unspoken, told them they were already too far in to turn back now. The dog tugged harder against the leash, its urgency impossible to ignore. The couple exchanged a look, equal parts fear and determination, before the man finally nodded. "Let's see where it leads us," he said. The dog moved as fast as its injured leg would allow, its nose low to the ground as it sniffed out a trail. The woman held on to the leash tightly, her heart pounding. She had never seen an animal act this way, as if it were on a mission. The path grew rougher as they left the safety of their backyard, weaving through the dense woods that bordered their property. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made them jump. The woods were alive with sounds, but none of them felt comforting. The further they went, the more the air seemed to thicken, heavy with something unexplainable. The dog suddenly stopped and let out a low, guttural growl. It stared straight ahead, its body stiff with tension. The woman followed its gaze and froze. In the distance, partially hidden by overgrown vines, stood an old, dilapidated shed. Its wooden planks were warped and rotting, the door slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. The man stepped in front of his wife protectively, his voice low. "Stay behind me," he said. The dog strained against the leash, whining now, as though desperate to reach the shed. The woman hesitated, gripping her husband's arm. "What if someone's in there?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up a sturdy branch from the ground, holding it like a makeshift weapon. Slowly, they approached the shed. Their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. As they neared the door, the woman's breath caught. There were claw marks etched into the wood, deep and jagged, as though something or someone had tried desperately to get in. Or out. The man pushed the door open cautiously, the hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. The dog barked sharply, startling them both. It lunged forward, pulling the leash from the woman's grasp, and bolted inside. "Wait!" she cried, rushing after it. Inside, the shed was small and cluttered, filled with old, rusted tools and broken furniture. The dog sniffed around frantically, its tail wagging despite its earlier fear. It stopped in front of a pile of rags in the corner, and began digging. The couple knelt beside it, helping to clear away the debris. What they uncovered sent a chill down their spines. Beneath the rags was a small wooden box, its surface scratched and worn. The man hesitated before lifting the lid, his hands trembling. Inside, they found a collection of photographs, yellowed with age. The pictures showed the dog healthy, vibrant, and sitting beside a man who could only be its original owner. But as they flipped through the photos, the images grew darker. The man appeared frightened in later shots, his eyes darting toward the camera as though someone had been watching him. The last photograph was the most chilling. It showed the man standing in front of the very same shed, his face pale and his expression haunted. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure tall and indistinct, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the image. The woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What is this?" she whispered. Before her husband could respond, the dog began barking furiously, its body pressed against the far wall of the shed. The couple turned to see what had caught its attention. There, etched into the wood, was a series of strange symbols. The symbols were crude, almost childlike, but they radiated an unsettling energy. The man reached out to touch them, but the woman grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said urgently. "We don't know what they mean." The dog's barking grew louder, more frantic. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the woods, as if something heavy had fallen nearby. The couple froze, their eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave," the man said, his voice shaking. He grabbed the box and tucked it under his arm, then picked up the leash. "Come on. We'll figure this out at home." They hurried back through the woods, their nerves frayed. Every step felt like a race against unseen eyes, watching them from the shadows. The dog stayed close, its body tense and alert. When they finally reached their house, they locked the doors and drew the curtains. The man set the box on the kitchen table, and the couple stared at it as though it might come alive. "We need answers," the woman said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "We can't just sit here waiting for something to happen." Her husband nodded, pulling out his phone. "I'll call the vet. Maybe she can tell us more about those symbols or the dog's connection to all of this." As he dialed, the woman returned to the dog, kneeling beside it and stroking its fur. "You know something, don't you?" she murmured. "You've seen things we can't even imagine." The dog looked up at her, its dark eyes filled with an intelligence that sent a shiver down her spine. It whimpered softly, resting its head on her lap. The call to the vet went unanswered, and the man frowned as he set his phone down. "That's strange," he said. "She always picks up." The tension in the room grew heavier, the air almost suffocating. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. The woman glanced toward the front door, half expecting to see someone or something standing there. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the house into brief darkness before coming back on. The couple stared at each other, their fear unspoken but palpable. "We're not alone," the woman said, her voice trembling. Before her husband could respond, the dog stood up abruptly, its body rigid and its ears perked. It let out a low growl, staring intently at the front door. The man grabbed the branch he had brought back from the woods, his grip tightening. "Stay behind me," he said again, moving toward the door. The woman clutched the dog's leash, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what awaited them on the other side of the door, but she knew one thing for certain: whatever had started on that highway was far from over. The man gripped the branch tightly as he reached for the door, his heart thudding loudly in his chest. The dog's growls deepened, a low and steady rumble that seemed to echo in the silent house. The woman stood behind him, clutching the leash, her eyes darting toward the windows, half expecting something to burst through them at any moment. Slowly, he turned the doorknob, bracing himself for whatever was outside. The door creaked open, and a rush of cold air swept into the house. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the yard. At first, everything seemed still. The man stepped onto the porch, his eyes scanning the darkness. And then he saw it. A single footprint in the dirt just beyond the porch steps. It was large, far too large to belong to any human. The edges were jagged, the shape unfamiliar, almost claw-like. He swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder at his wife. "There's something out here," he said, his voice low but urgent. Before she could respond, the dog lunged forward, nearly pulling the leash from her hands. It barked furiously, its eyes locked on something moving in the distance. The man squinted, trying to make out the shape, but it was too far away, shrouded in shadows. Then it moved again, faster this time, darting between the trees with unnatural speed. A chill ran down his spine. "Get back inside," he said quickly, ushering his wife and the dog through the door. He locked it behind them, his mind racing. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice trembling. He shook his head. "I don't know. But it wasn't human. And it's getting closer." The dog continued barking, its body pressed against the door as though it were trying to warn them. The woman knelt beside it, her hands shaking as she stroked its fur. "What is going on?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging the house into darkness. The woman let out a small gasp, and the man cursed under his breath, fumbling for the flashlight they kept in a drawer by the door. As he turned it on, the beam of light revealed something that made his blood run cold. On the floor, just inside the door, was another footprint. This one was fresh, the mud still wet. "Impossible," he muttered, stepping back. The woman's eyes widened in horror. "How did it get inside?" Before he could answer, a loud thud came from upstairs. The sound was heavy, deliberate, as though something was moving around above them. The couple froze, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. "We didn't leave any windows open upstairs," the man said, his voice barely audible. The dog's barking grew louder, more frantic. It tugged against the leash, trying to break free. The woman held on tightly, her knuckles white. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice shaking. "Whatever that thing is, it's in the house." The man nodded, his mind racing for a plan. "We'll head to the car. We can drive to the vet's office, maybe she can help us figure out what's going on." They moved cautiously, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as they made their way toward the back door. But as they reached the kitchen, the man stopped abruptly, his heart sinking. The back door was wide open, the lock broken. It wasn't just inside the house. It had been here before. "What does it want?" the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. Before he could respond, the dog let out a sharp yelp, its body trembling as it stared into the darkness beyond the open door. The couple followed its gaze and saw something that made their hearts stop. A pair of glowing eyes staring back at them from the shadows. The man raised the flashlight, the beam catching the outline of a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long. Its face was obscured, but its eyes burned with an otherworldly light, unblinking and fixed on them. The woman screamed, stumbling backward as the man stepped in front of her, brandishing the branch like a weapon. The dog barked wildly, its body pressed against the man's legs as though trying to shield him. "Stay back!" the man shouted, his voice filled with both fear and defiance. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching, as though it were studying them. Then, slowly, it raised one long, clawed hand and pointed toward the wooden box still sitting on the kitchen table. The man glanced at the box, then back at the figure. "What do you want?" he demanded. The figure didn't respond, but the air seemed to grow colder, the shadows around it deepening. The woman clung to the dog, her breathing rapid. "We can't let it have the box," she said, her voice firm despite her fear. The man nodded, his grip tightening on the branch. "Whatever's in there, it's important. And it doesn't want us to know the truth." The figure took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The couple backed away, the man keeping the flashlight trained on it. "Go," he said to his wife, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "Take the dog and get to the car. I'll hold it off." "No!" she cried, her eyes filling with tears. I'm not leaving you. You have to, he insisted. If we both stay, none of us will make it out. Go! Reluctantly, she grabbed the dog's leash and ran toward the front door, her heart breaking with every step. The dog resisted at first, barking and whining, but eventually it followed her, its movements reluctant. As the door slammed shut behind them, the man turned back to face the figure. It had stopped moving, its glowing eyes locked on him. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew one thing for certain: whatever was inside that box held the answers they needed. And he was willing to risk everything to protect it. The figure took another step forward, its glowing eyes narrowing as it focused on the man. He tightened his grip on the branch, his heart hammering in his chest. The room felt impossibly cold now, the air heavy and hard to breathe. He didn't dare look away. Somehow, he knew that if he did, it would be the end. Stay back, he said again, his voice trembling but firm. He edged closer to the table where the wooden box sat, its presence now feeling heavier than it should. The figure didn't respond, but its gaze shifted briefly toward the box. It wanted it, needed it. The man took a deep breath, his mind racing. Whatever was inside that box wasn't just important, it was dangerous, and not just to them. Outside, the dog's barking echoed through the night, and he hoped his wife had made it safely to the car. He needed to buy her time, but every second that passed felt like an eternity. The figure suddenly lunged, moving faster than he thought possible. He swung the branch instinctively, the impact reverberating up his arm as it struck the figure's arm. It stumbled back, but only briefly, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. The man took the opportunity to grab the box, clutching it tightly against his chest. The figure froze, its head tilting slightly as if it were calculating its next move. You can't have it, the man said, his voice stronger now. Whatever you're after, it ends here. The figure hissed, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. Then, with a sudden and unnatural grace, it pointed one clawed finger at the box. The symbols on the wood began to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The man felt a strange sensation, a pull deep inside him, as if the box were trying to communicate. Images flashed in his mind, visions of the dog running through the woods, the old shed, and the man from the photographs. He saw the figure too, always lurking in the shadows, waiting. It wasn't just after the box. It had been tied to it all along, like a guardian or a prisoner. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The box wasn't just an object. It was a trap, and the creature was bound to it. Opening it would set it free, but destroying it might destroy everything connected to it, including the dog. The man hesitated, his hands trembling as the box grew warmer in his grasp. The figure took another step forward, its glowing eyes filled with rage and desperation. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice breaking. What are you? The creature paused, as if considering the question. For a moment, its eyes dimmed, and it seemed almost human. Then it spoke, its voice a distorted echo. I was the first, it said. The protector. But they turned me into this. The man's mind reeled. The photographs. The symbols. The dog. It all connected. The creature wasn't just some monster. It had once been a person, a protector of something ancient and powerful. And now, it was trapped in this form, bound to the box for eternity. I'm sorry, the man whispered, his grip on the box tightening. The creature's eyes burned brighter again, and it lunged once more. This time, the man didn't hesitate. He threw the box to the ground, raising the branch high before slamming it down with all his strength. The box shattered, the wood splintering into pieces. A blinding light erupted from the fragments, filling the room with an otherworldly glow. The creature let out an ear-piercing scream, its body writhing as the light consumed it. The man shielded his eyes, his ears ringing as the sound grew louder and louder. And then silence. When he opened his eyes, the room was still. The figure was gone, and the broken pieces of the box lay scattered across the floor. The symbols on the wood had faded, their glow extinguished. The man staggered back, his chest heaving. He didn't feel relief, only emptiness. The dog's barking grew louder outside, and he realized he needed to check on his wife. He ran to the front door, throwing it open. The dog was standing on the porch, wagging its tail frantically as it saw him. His wife stood beside the car, tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" she asked, running to him. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse. "The box, it's gone." She hugged him tightly, the dog circling them as if sensing their relief. But just as they began to calm, the dog stopped, its ears perking up. It turned toward the woods, letting out a low growl. The man and his wife followed its gaze, their hearts sinking as they saw what lay in the distance. The shed. Its door was wide open, and from inside, a faint, glowing light pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat. The man's blood ran cold. Whatever they had stopped, it wasn't over. Not yet. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The man stared at the glowing light coming from the shed, his body frozen in place. His wife clung to his arm, her breath uneven as fear gripped them both. The dog stood between them and the woods, growling low, its body tense and ready to defend them. "We can't leave it like this," the man said finally, his voice trembling. He looked down at his wife, searching her face for reassurance, though he wasn't sure there was any left to give. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "But we can't go in there alone. Whatever this is, it's bigger than us." The dog barked, breaking the tense silence, as if trying to urge them to move. The man took a deep breath and glanced at the car. "We'll go back to town. We need help. Maybe the vet can explain more, or someone who knows about this kind of thing." His wife hesitated but eventually agreed. "Okay. Let's go before it's too late." They climbed into the car, the dog jumping into the back seat and watching the shed as the man started the engine. The headlights illuminated the driveway, casting long shadows over the yard. As they pulled away, the glow from the shed dimmed slightly, as though it were watching them leave. The drive back to town felt longer than it should have. The woods on either side of the road seemed darker, more menacing, and every shadow felt alive. Either of them spoke much, the weight of what they'd just experienced too heavy to put into words. When they reached the vet's office, it was well past midnight. The lights inside were still on, and the sight of them felt like a small comfort. The couple hurried to the door, the dog trotting beside them. The vet opened the door almost immediately, her face lined with concern. "I was starting to worry," she said, ushering them inside. "What happened?" The man hesitated, unsure of how to explain everything. Finally, he said, "There's something in the woods. Something tied to that box you gave us." The vet's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and unease. "The box? What do you mean?" The man explained everything: the figure in the house, the strange symbols, the glowing light in the shed. As he spoke, the vet's face grew paler, her hand gripping the counter for support. "I didn't know," she whispered when he finished. "I mean, I knew the box was old, that it had a history, but I didn't know it was connected to this." "What is it?" the woman asked, her voice filled with urgency. "What's happening to us?" The vet sighed, her eyes darting toward the dog. "The box was supposed to be a kind of seal, a way to contain something ancient and dangerous. It wasn't meant to be opened. But now—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Now it's free," the man finished, his voice hollow. The vet nodded. "If the shed is glowing, it means whatever was contained has moved. It's trying to regain its power, to anchor itself fully in this world. Can we stop it?" the woman asked, her hand tightening on the dog's leash. The vet hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There might be a way, but it won't be easy." And it will require all of us. The man felt a flicker of hope, though it was fragile. What do we need to do? The vet explained that they would need to confront whatever was in the shed, to sever its connection to this world before it could fully manifest. It would take courage and precise timing, but it wasn't impossible. They gathered supplies of flashlight, a small vial of powder the vet claimed would disrupt the entity's energy, and a handful of old symbols drawn on paper that were meant to weaken its hold. The vet warned them to be cautious, to stay together no matter what. As they drove back to the house, the tension in the car was palpable. The dog sat quietly in the back seat, its eyes alert and watchful. When they reached the property, the glow from the shed was brighter now, pulsating steadily like a heartbeat. The man parked the car, and they climbed out, their movements slow and deliberate. The vet handed the vial of powder to the man. "Throw this at it if it gets too close. It'll buy us time." He nodded, gripping the vial tightly as they approached the shed. The dog barked once, then fell silent, its body tense as it followed closely behind them. Inside the shed, the air was heavy, thick with an energy that made it hard to breathe. The glow was coming from a circle on the floor, the symbols etched into the wood now shining with an eerie light. In the center of the circle stood the figure, its form more defined now. It turned to face them, its glowing eyes narrowing. The vet stepped forward, holding up one of the symbols. "You don't belong here," she said firmly. "Your time is over." The figure let out a low growl, the sound reverberating through the small space. The man felt his courage falter, but he forced himself to stay still, to hold his ground. The vet began chanting softly, the words foreign and rhythmic. The light in the shed flickered, and the figure seemed to falter, its form wavering like smoke. "Now!" The vet shouted, and the man threw the powder into the circle. The reaction was immediate. The light flared brighter, the figure letting out a scream that made them all cover their ears. The symbols on the floor began to fade, their glow dimming as the figure writhed, its body shrinking and dissolving into the air. When the light finally faded, the shed was silent. The circle on the floor was gone, the wood unmarked as though it had never been there. The man let out a shaky breath, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. The vet placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a small, weary smile. "It's over," she said softly. They left the shed, the dog bounding ahead of them as if sensing the danger was gone. The house felt warmer now, the oppressive weight in the air lifted. That night, as they sat together in the living room, the man and his wife reflected on everything that had happened. The dog lay at their feet, its eyes closed, its body finally relaxed. "We never should have opened that box," the woman said, her voice quiet. The man nodded. "But maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe we were supposed to stop it for good." The vet agreed. "Sometimes these things find their way into the wrong hands. But you did what needed to be done." As the hours passed, they talked about what to do next, how to move forward and rebuild after the chaos of the last few days. They knew they couldn't forget what had happened, but they also knew they couldn't let it define them. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal. The dog seemed happier, its energy brighter, as if it, too, had been freed from a burden. The couple grew closer, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced together. And though the shed remained standing, they never went near it again. It stood as a silent reminder of what they had overcome, a testament to their courage and the unbreakable bond between them. As time passed, the memories of that night began to fade, replaced by new ones filled with hope and love. But every now and then, on quiet evenings, the man would glance out at the woods and remember the glow, the figure, and the box that had changed their lives forever. He would shake his head, grateful it was all behind them. But deep down, he knew the world was full of mysteries, some best left undiscovered. And if they ever found themselves face to face with another, they would be ready. Together.